Bam! The front door of my ranch slammed open so hard it echoed across the fields like a gunshot. The sound tore through the peaceful morning like a storm, waking up every creature for miles, and waking up someone else too. But the people who broke in had no idea who was napping just 30 feet from that front door, inside my guest room. They didn't know that the sheriff himself, Sheriff Walter Briggs, was sleeping in his boots with a badge still pinned to his chest and a revolver within reach. The HOA patrol didn't knock. They didn't call. They didn't even think. They just came storming in like they owned the place. 2 of them, wearing stiff Navy uniforms and HOA patches sewn crookedly on their arms, pretending like they were law enforcement. They stomped in with clipboards and radios, shouting about code violations and unauthorized fencing. But what they really didn't know was that this ranch, it wasn't part of their HOA. It never had been. And the sheriff inside, he was off duty, but not unarmed. I stood frozen at the barn gate, watching it happen in slow motion. My hands were still dusty from the morning feed, straw clinging to my sleeves. I tried to yell, but the wind carried my voice the wrong way. The patrol was already inside, spreading out like they were searching for something. And then it happened. A deep, booming voice, cold, calm, and dangerous, rang out from inside the house. You just made the worst mistake of your lives. What happened next made me drop the feed bucket and sprint. My boots hit the porch with a loud thud as I yelled, "Sheriff, don't shoot!" But I was too late. Sheriff Briggs was already on his feet. Now let me tell you how we got here. My name is Jack McAllister. I'm a 3rd-generation rancher here in Red Bluff County, Texas. My land stretches farther than the eye can see, with hills that roll like the backs of sleeping cattle and a creek that cuts right through the middle like a silver ribbon. I inherited this ranch from my father, who got it from his father. It's been in our family for nearly 90 years. I live a quiet life. Early mornings, late evenings, and everything in between smells like sweat, horses, and hard work. I don't bother anyone, and I never joined the HOA. I didn't have to. My property sits just outside their borders, technically, legally, and historically. That ranch line has never moved, but that didn't stop the HOA from trying. The Homeowners Association of Cedar Loop Ridge. Fancy name, isn't it? Sounds peaceful, like a place with lemonade stands and trimmed hedges. But lately it's become something else, power-hungry, bully-like. Their president, a red-faced man named Earl Tennyson, started sending letters last summer claiming my fencing violated community aesthetic guidelines. I laughed and tossed them in the fire pit. Then came the fines. I ignored them. Next came the threats. I reported those. But what I didn't expect was for their patrol squad to start roaming past the actual HOA border, treating every property around like it was theirs. That's when I got the sheriff involved. Sheriff Walter Briggs has been a friend of my family for years. He used to fish with my dad and taught me how to shoot a rifle when I was barely 10. He's a big man, slow-talking, slow-moving, but sharp-eyed and faster than lightning when he needs to be. After hearing about the HOA's threats, he told me, "Don't worry, Jack. They step one boot on your land, I'll handle it." That morning, Sheriff Briggs had just finished a late shift. He came by for coffee and to check on the cows. He was too tired to drive back to town, so I told him to crash in the guest room. He still had his gun belt on. That was the last I saw of him before I went out to feed the horses. Everything felt normal, until it didn't. The HOA patrol didn't knock. They didn't ask. They broke the lock and stormed into the house shouting about non-compliance, snapping photos, and calling out fake citations. It was all noise. Until it wasn't. I ran up the porch, heart slamming in my chest. I grabbed the handle just as the sound of a gun being cocked hit my ears like thunder. Sheriff Briggs had emerged from the hallway in his undershirt, holding his revolver steady with one hand and flashing his badge with the other. His voice shook the walls. "Hands where I can see them. Now." One of the patrol guys dropped his clipboard. The other started reaching for something on his belt. Briggs didn't flinch. I said now. But just then, before I could even speak, a third man stepped into the house. He wasn't in uniform. He was wearing a beige suit and shiny loafers, his shirt tight around his stomach. It was Earl Tennyson himself. He froze when he saw the gun pointed at his men. "Sheriff, what is the meaning of this?" Sheriff Briggs didn't even blink. "Earl, you just sent your dogs into the wrong house." My breath caught. Earl stepped forward, trying to puff his chest out. "This man is in violation of HOA property standards. We were performing an inspection." Sheriff Briggs growled. "On private property? Without a warrant? On land that's not even part of your HOA?" Earl opened his mouth to speak. But before he could lie again, the sound of sirens split the air. Backup was already on the way. Sheriff had pressed the silent alert. That's when one of the patrol guys panicked. He made a run for it, straight out the back door. The moment the patrol guy bolted through the back door, everything slowed down. He crashed right into my cattle fence, flipped over it like a rag doll, and landed face first in a fresh pile of manure. But that wasn't the shocking part. Not even close. Standing just a few steps away from the back porch, sipping coffee from a silver thermos and watching the whole thing unfold, was Deputy Maria Gonzalez. She had pulled up silently moments earlier, called in by the sheriff's emergency signal. Maria didn't yell, she didn't run. She just strolled over, one hand resting on her holster, and said coolly, "That's trespassing, criminal mischief, and attempted flight from a lawful scene. You want to add anything else to that list?" The patrol guy tried to get up, but she planted a boot on his back. Inside the house, Earl Tennyson's face drained of all color. His eyes darted to the door, then to the sheriff, who hadn't lowered his gun. "Sheriff Briggs," Earl said, trying to regain control, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Briggs slowly holstered his revolver. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You just broke into private property, falsely claimed jurisdiction, and endangered yourself and your men. That's more than a misunderstanding, Earl. That's criminal trespass." I finally spoke, breathless. "Sheriff, they kicked the door open. Didn't even knock." Briggs turned toward me, nodded once, then faced Earl again. "Is this what the HOAs come to? Playing cops on ranches they don't own?" Earl swallowed hard. It's about community standards. The fencing, the unregistered outbuildings. "I told you weeks ago," I snapped, finally finding my voice. "This property was never part of Cedar Loop Ridge HOA. My landline starts at the creek. Your fancy subdivision doesn't even reach past the bend." Deputy Maria entered the house, her boots leaving clean tracks over the muddy floor. "I've got one of your patrolmen in custody outside. He tried to run. Should I detain the rest?" Sheriff Briggs gave Earl a hard stare. "That depends." Earl suddenly looked much smaller than his reputation. His shoulders sagged. "Maybe we overstepped." "No," Briggs said. "You broke in. You acted like you had authority you never had." He turned toward me. "Jack, you want to press charges?" I looked around at the mess. My front door splintered, my rugs soaked with mud, and a sheriff who could have been shot over this nonsense. "Let them clean it up," I said. "Fix my door, apologize, publicly, and never set foot past my fence again." Earl opened his mouth but stopped when Briggs raised a brow. "Done," he muttered. That should have been the end. But it wasn't. Because 2 days later my mailbox disappeared. And that brings us to a quieter part of the storm. The next morning after the break-in, I tried to settle back into ranch life. The sheriff and Deputy Maria stayed behind for a while, sipping coffee on the porch while we watched the sun rise over the east field. "You're lucky I was sleeping here," Briggs said. "I'd say you're the lucky one," I grinned. "My guest bed is more comfortable than a squad car." We chuckled. But deep down, we knew this wasn't over. Later that afternoon, I took a drive into town. Had to pick up supplies, wire for the broken gate, nails for the busted door frame, and a few bags of feed. People at the general store had already heard the news. "Jack," said Marvin, the hardware store owner, "I heard you had a showdown out there. HOA playing cowboy, huh?" "Something like that," I muttered. "Well," he said with a wink, "next time you need backup, call me. I got a rake and a bad temper. I laughed and promised I would. Back at the ranch, things seemed calm again, until I walked down my driveway and noticed something odd. My mailbox was gone. At first I thought it was the wind, but no. The post was still there, cleanly sawn off at the base. Someone had come in the night and taken it. I looked down the road. No tracks, no tire marks, nothing. I called the sheriff. "You sure it didn't fall?" Briggs asked. "Post is clean cut, someone used a saw." He sighed. "I'll swing by." But deep inside, I knew what this was. Earl wasn't finished. He was just getting creative. 2 days later, it got worse. I was mending a fence post near the west pasture when I heard tires crunching up my gravel road. I stood up, wiped the sweat from my brow, and squinted into the sun. A black SUV pulled up, tinted windows, HOA plates. I sighed, grabbed my hat, and walked over. The window rolled down. A woman leaned out, mid-50s, gray bun, sunglasses so big they looked like welding goggles. "Mr. McAllister," she said with fake sweetness. "I'm Martha Dane, Vice President of Cedar Loop Ridge HOA. I crossed my arms. "Ma'am, I don't want any trouble. Your people already caused enough of that." She smiled wider. "Oh, I'm not here for trouble. I'm here with a proposal." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "We believe it's in the best interest of the community that your land be voluntarily annexed into our association." I stared at her. She continued. "You have a beautiful property, very valuable, and it would look so much better if it followed our code. Imagine white fencing, matching barns, organized landscaping. You could be part of something bigger." I couldn't help but laugh. "You want me to volunteer to give you control of my ranch?" It would save a lot of future misunderstandings. There it was, the threat beneath the smile. I leaned down until I was eye level with her. "Lady," I said, "if I had to choose between joining your HOA or letting a wild boar take over my barn, I'd hand the keys to the pig." She huffed and rolled up her window. The SUV drove off without another word. But that wasn't the end either. Because that night, around midnight, I heard something outside. Footsteps, not on gravel, on wood. Someone was on my porch. I reached for the shotgun under my bed and moved silently to the window. Through the curtain, I saw a shadow, a figure, tall, standing in front of the broken mailbox post. I couldn't see a face, and just as I reached for the door, the porch light blew out with a loud pop. And then, total darkness. The light bulb burst like a firecracker. Glass shattered and fell onto the porch, the last flicker of brightness swallowed by the deep Texas night. My hand tightened on the shotgun. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. Every instinct in my bones told me something was wrong, dead wrong. I edged closer to the window, staying low. The shadow was still there, still standing, still not moving. That wasn't just trespassing. That was intimidation. I didn't call the sheriff right away. I stepped outside. The night air was heavy and humid, thick with the smell of hay and cedar. I moved like a cat, silent and steady, barrel first. I crept around the porch corner, past the broken light fixture, until I could see the post again. But the figure was gone, vanished. In their place was something that made my stomach twist into a knot. A fresh envelope, stuck to the post with a single silver tack. HOA letterhead. I snatched it, opened it right there under the pale moonlight. Inside was one typed sentence. "You were warned. No name, no signature, no details." I felt something crawling up my spine. Not fear exactly, but rage, slow and burning. This wasn't just a push for land anymore. This was a war of nerves. Psychological warfare. I was no stranger to fights. Ranchers deal with all kinds. Coyotes, floods, thieves. But HOA thugs playing mind games. That was a new one. I made a call. "Sheriff," I said into the phone. "It's Jack. I think this just turned into something else." By morning, Sheriff Briggs was on my porch again, a new bulb in one hand and a toolbox in the other. "This what we're doing now," he muttered. "Replacing porch lights between arrest warrants?" I handed him coffee. That letter wasn't just a threat. It was a message. "They're pushing, Sheriff. Hard." Briggs nodded, then turned serious. "We're documenting everything, every scare tactic, every trespass, but I can't move until one of them crosses the line." I stared at the dirt road leading down from my property. "Feels like they're circling." He didn't argue. That afternoon, things calmed down. I went back to ranch work, trying to forget the envelope, the broken light, and the woman in the SUV. The sun was high. Horses were grazing. Chickens were cackling near the coop. For a few hours, the world felt normal again. Until Earl Tennyson showed up. This time, he brought 5 people with him, 3 men and 2 women, all in HOA jackets, all carrying clipboards and wearing smug, rehearsed expressions. They didn't come onto the land. They stood right at the edge of my fence line, hands on hips, like they were measuring something invisible. I didn't approach. I watched from the porch. One of them, a lanky guy with a mole on his cheek, held up a camera and snapped pictures of my barn. I walked down and stopped at the gate. "You got a warrant?" Earl spoke, not looking at me. "Just making notes." "On what?" "Future acquisition." I blinked. "Excuse me?" Earl turned then. "There's been a new proposal. The county wants to develop a new road through this area. Your ranch sits right in the path. If you're annexed into the HOA, we can represent you, protect your interests." I laughed coldly. "So this is about a land grab." "Jack," Earl said with a wide, fake grin, "you could either join us or be moved by the county. It's your choice." I didn't say a word. I turned and walked back up my porch steps. Sheriff Briggs was right. They hadn't crossed the legal line yet, but they were dancing on the edge. I spent that night reviewing all my deeds, every property line, every permit. The ranch had been in my family for generations. We never owed a single thing to Cedar Loop Ridge. I even found the original surveyor's map tucked in my father's old desk. But around 2 a.m., just as I was falling asleep with papers on my chest, my phone buzzed. A motion alert. My outdoor cameras caught movement. I opened the app. There they were. 3 figures. This time, they were walking across my west pasture. Flashlights low, hooded sweatshirts, no cars, no sound. They weren't on the road. They were inside the fence. I jumped up, grabbed my gun, and opened the safe beside the bed. I didn't go alone this time. I called Deputy Maria. "Meet me by the west fence," I told her. "Bring backup." 15 minutes later, she met me under the stars, her cruiser lights off. We moved in together, slow and careful. The flashlights bobbing in the distance flickered and moved behind the trees near my old barn. Maria raised her radio. "Unit 5 in position. Suspects on foot, possible illegal trespass, requesting drone support." We kept moving. My heart was pounding, my boots wet with dew, when a noise came from behind the shed. Rustling. Then footsteps. Maria stepped forward, weapon drawn. "Stop. Sheriff's Department. Hands where I can see." But instead of stopping, one of them dropped something metallic and bolted. I saw it roll. A canister. I ran forward and looked down. It wasn't trash. It was a tracking beacon, like the kind they attach to cars. They were trying to tag my livestock trailer. Before I could process it, Maria shouted, "They're fleeing westbound through the trees. One's down, 2 running." I chased after them as best I could, but the woods were thick. The floodlights only reached so far. By the time the sheriff's drone unit arrived, they were gone. But they'd left enough behind. Maria picked up the dropped item and radioed it in. "Confirmed. GPS tracker device. Evidence of premeditated surveillance. Suspects trespassed on private land. Sheriff, we've got a whole new game on our hands." Sheriff Briggs' voice crackled through the radio. "Round everyone up. Nobody plays spy games on my watch." And that's when it really exploded. Because the next morning, I got a notice from the county. A sudden, urgent call for an emergency zoning meeting. And guess whose name was on the list of complainants? Earl Tennyson. Where are y'all watching from? Things are just heating up. And this next move from the HOA? It's their boldest and stupidest yet. The emergency zoning meeting was set for 9 a.m. sharp at the county municipal building. I hadn't even finished my breakfast when I got the call from Briggs. They're trying to fast-track a zoning change that would classify part of your ranch as developable community land, he said, his voice tight with disgust. I nearly dropped my coffee. What does that mean? It means if they succeed, Briggs growled, they'll be able to claim a portion of your land as legally subject to HOA review. That's the backdoor they've been hunting for. My jaw clenched so hard I felt it in my ears. They can't do that. I have the deeds, the boundaries, everything. They know, Briggs said. But this isn't about truth. It's about pressure. That's when I realized something important. They weren't playing by the rules anymore. This was no longer a game. It was a siege. I threw on my boots, grabbed my file folder with all the land records and headed out. The meeting room at the county hall was already packed when I arrived. HOA members in polo shirts filled the rows, whispering, pointing. At the front sat the zoning committee, 3 old men with gray eyebrows and thick glasses. They looked more like bingo referees than people deciding the fate of private land. I spotted Earl Tennyson near the front. He had a leather folder tucked under his arm, and that same smug smirk plastered across his face. When I walked in, every head turned. I didn't look around. I just walked straight up to the front row, dropped my folder on the desk, and locked eyes with Earl. "Hope you brought a good lie today," I said quietly. His smile wavered. The meeting started with boring formalities, then a man from the HOA, a bald fellow with a voice like an accountant, stood and delivered their pitch. They claimed that my land, especially the western slope near the creek, was neglected, that it posed a fire hazard, and that the HOA had a duty to maintain community integrity and safety. I wanted to laugh, but I waited. Then Earl stood. "This ranch, while technically outside our original boundaries, is central to the look and feel of Cedar Loop Ridge. We believe that voluntary annexation into the HOA will not only enhance its value, but also benefit the entire neighborhood." He turned to me. "And if the landowner refuses, we move for county-level oversight due to public interest." That's when I stood up. "Public interest?" I snapped. "There's no one living within a quarter mile of that creek. You people are just mad you can't control what you don't own." I opened my folder and pulled out the old surveyor map, dated 1954. I showed them the deed, the zoning permits, the boundary lines signed and sealed by the state. "This land's been private for 3 generations. It's not part of your community, and it never will be." The room was silent. One of the zoning committee members adjusted his glasses and studied the documents. "These are legitimate," he said. "We'll need time to review." But Earl wasn't done. He slammed his fist on the table. "You don't understand," he hissed. "That man is a threat to our neighborhood. His chickens roam, his fence is patched with wood, his porch has peeling paint." I raised an eyebrow. "You want to take my land because of paint?" Murmurs rose in the room. A few audience members actually chuckled. Earl realized he'd overplayed his hand. But before he could backpedal, the door swung open behind us. Everyone turned. In walked Sheriff Briggs, uniform, hat, badge gleaming. And right beside him, a federal land use attorney. That's when I knew something had changed. Briggs didn't speak. He handed a sealed envelope to the zoning board, nodded, and sat beside me. The board reviewed the document, eyebrows rising. Then the lead commissioner leaned forward. "Mr. Tennyson," he said slowly, "it appears you've been filing false claims regarding land ownership, and, according to this report, your patrol group has committed multiple acts of trespass. We're not only rejecting your petition, but we're also opening a formal inquiry into Cedar Loop Ridge HOA practices." The room exploded in whispers. Earl looked like someone had dumped ice water down his back. The vote was unanimous. Motion denied. That should have been the end of it. But deep in my gut, I felt it wasn't. I went home thinking maybe they'd give up. Maybe that public humiliation would be enough. But the next night, just as I turned in, I heard it. Dogs barking, loud, scared, aggressive. I jumped from bed, grabbed my flashlight and rifle, and raced out toward the barn. The night was thick with fog, my breath visible in the cold. And then, through the haze, I saw it. Flames. A section of my outer barn wall was burning. I didn't hesitate. I yanked the hose from the side well and started spraying. My dog circled nervously, barking at the shadows. I called the fire department, called Briggs. We got it out before it reached the hayloft. But the smell of burnt wood lingered. The fire marshal found traces of an accelerant. Gasoline. It was arson. But there was no camera footage. Whoever did it knew my blind spots. Sheriff Briggs walked beside me through the wet grass, jaw tight. They just declared war, Jack. I nodded slowly. Then it's time I stopped playing defense. The very next morning, I took a trip into town. Not to the sheriff's office, not to the store. I went straight to the county recorder's office, and I filed a motion of my own. One that would shake Cedar Loop Ridge to its core. You see, the HOA thought they were the big dogs. But they didn't know who actually owned the mineral rights beneath their own subdivision. Spoiler alert, it wasn't them. The county clerk stared at me, blinking slowly, like she wasn't sure she'd heard right. You're filing a mineral rights activation? She asked, her pen frozen above the form. I nodded. That's right. She leaned in slightly, whispering, Mr. McAllister, are you sure you want to go this route? This could stir up a lot of trouble. I smiled without humor. Ma'am, trouble already showed up. I'm just inviting it to sit down and watch me work. Because while the HOA spent months trying to scare me with citations, threats, and zoning tricks, they forgot to check the real records, the deep ones. The kind my grandfather made sure stayed airtight after he bought this land dirt cheap during the oil rush of '63. Beneath Cedar Loop Ridge, under their fake ponds, tennis courts, and regulation-sized driveways, ran old oil veins. Not big enough for full-scale drilling anymore, but valuable enough for small extraction. And guess who owned the underground rights? Not the HOA. Me. I had the title. Signed. Sealed. Registered. And now, I had just officially reclaimed those rights. You should have seen the clerk's face when she stamped it. Back on the ranch, I wasn't smiling, because that fire had done more than scorch wood. It had singed my peace of mind. I reinforced the barn, added motion lights, trail cameras, and even hired my neighbor's son, Travis, to help with patrol shifts at night. He was ex-Navy and built like a bull. Paid him in cash and fresh eggs. Anyone sneezes near the fence line, I want to know, I told him. Yes, sir. He nodded. Sheriff Briggs was still working on tracking who lit the fire. So far, no prints, no witnesses. But we both had our suspicions. Then came the letter. Delivered by courier this time, not by mail. The envelope was slick black, sealed with a silver HOA logo. Inside, a formal notice stating that, due to escalating tensions and community concern, I was now barred from attending any HOA meetings, walking on HOA-controlled sidewalks, or engaging in any form of contact with board members or their families. I laughed. They were banning me from public sidewalks I'd walked since I was 5. But that wasn't the worst part. They also threatened to sue for emotional distress caused by hostile behavior at the zoning meeting. Earl was really losing it. I called my lawyer, a calm man named Douglas who rarely spoke above a whisper. After reading the letter, he simply muttered, "Interesting. They're shaking in their loafers." Then, 2 days later, came the part that almost broke me. I was doing rounds near the chicken coops when I saw my horse Bandit limping. I ran to him, heart racing. Blood. There was a long gash down his hind leg, fresh and raw. I examined the fencing. Someone had cut it. clean slice, then strung fishing wire across the pasture, just high enough to trip a running animal. I nearly collapsed. Bandit had been with me for 10 years, loyal, fast, proud. Now he was bleeding because some coward couldn't win a land war fair and square. I called the vet. Then I called Briggs. When he arrived, I didn't speak for a full minute. He didn't either. We just stared at the torn wire, the hoof prints, the blood in the dirt. "Sheriff," I finally said, "they crossed the line." He nodded slowly. "They don't think you'll fight back the way they can't see coming." "Well," I said, pulling the mineral rights deed from my back pocket, "they're about to learn." 2 days later, the HOA had an emergency board meeting. This time they didn't invite anyone, but I didn't need to be there, because I had already filed notice with the State Energy Commission. They had 30 days to respond to my activation, and once it was approved, I could lease a rig to start testing those wells. Legally. Imagine the HOA's perfect little neighborhood, with a shiny new drilling platform humming at the edge of their playground. The best part? Every time they flushed their designer toilets or watered their fancy imported hedges, they'd be doing it over land they didn't own and couldn't control. Earl showed up at my gate the next morning. He wasn't alone. He brought 2 lawyers. I didn't let them in. We talked through the fence. "You've gone too far," Earl snapped, his face redder than ever. "You cut my fence. You injured my horse. You set fire to my barn." "I didn't." "Don't lie," I growled. "I've got the evidence building." The taller lawyer leaned in. "Mr. McAllister, surely we can reach some compromise." "Nope." I pointed toward the creek. "That's the line. I stay on my side. You stay on yours. Or the next person stepping across it's going to be escorted back in handcuffs." That was when something happened I didn't expect. Earl smiled. Not smug, not sarcastic, just cold. "We'll see about that," he said. Then they left. I didn't sleep that night, and with good reason. Because early the next morning, I got a call from Travis. "Jack," he said breathlessly over the phone, "you need to come out here. Now." I jumped in the truck, heart in my throat. As I turned onto the back road that wrapped around my west pasture, I slammed the brakes so hard the tires screamed. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. 8 vehicles, 2 bulldozers, and a dump truck. HOA had sent a private construction crew to start building a gravel road across my land. They brought machinery. They brought fences. They were paving a road straight through my pasture. And standing right in the middle of it, Earl, wearing sunglasses, holding coffee, smiling. Didn't park the truck. I launched out of it. Dust rose behind me like a wildfire as I sprinted down the slope toward the chaos happening on my land. The bulldozers were already in gear, one rumbling dangerously close to my cattle troughs. Workers in neon vests waved flags like it was a parade. One of them was even pounding metal stakes into the dirt. This wasn't trespassing anymore. This was a full-blown invasion. I shouted at the top of my lungs, "Kill the engines now!" Some of the workers paused. Others kept going. They didn't know who I was. They were just doing a job. Paid laborers following orders from the clipboard-holding man in the center of it all, Earl Tennyson. I stormed toward him. "You have 10 seconds to get off my land." Earl turned slowly, lifting his sunglasses like he was inspecting a hotel room. "Jack," he said coolly, "you're overreacting." "You brought bulldozers," I snapped. "This is a planned access road," he said, completely unfazed. "The county approved the development this morning. It's part of the new easement we filed under emergency HOA infrastructure updates." My fists clenched. "You forged that permit." "No," he said with a crooked grin. "I just moved a few things through. Quickly." My vision blurred with fury. That's when a familiar black and gold cruiser appeared at the top of the ridge. Then another. Then 3 more. One after the other, they lined the edge of the property. Red and blue lights flashing in unison. And then I saw him, Sheriff Walter Briggs. He stepped out of his car with a shotgun slung across his shoulder. Not drawn, but present. He strolled down the pasture like he owned it. A hush fell over the workers. The bulldozers cut off. Everyone turned. Earl stiffened. "Sheriff Briggs," he said, trying to sound composed. "I wasn't aware we needed a police presence this morning." Briggs didn't smile. "You didn't request one, but the landowner did. And last time I checked, this ranch doesn't fall under HOA jurisdiction." Earl held up a file. "This is a legal easement permit signed by the county development officer. You'll find—" Briggs held up his hand. "I already reviewed it." He pulled a second file from under his arm. "Funny thing, your version was signed yesterday with a signature from someone who retired 6 months ago." Gasps went around the workers. Earl's face turned pale. "You forged county documents, Earl? That's a felony. You and your buddies just dug a trench into private property using illegal paperwork." Earl started to backpedal. "Now wait just a minute. This is all a misunderstanding," Sheriff Briggs whistled. The deputies moved in. "You," Briggs said, pointing to the lead bulldozer operator. "Kill the machine. Step away." He turned to Earl. "You're coming with me." 2 deputies flanked Earl and read him his rights. "I want a lawyer," Earl snapped. "You're gonna need a whole team of them," Briggs replied. As they cuffed him, I finally breathed again. But Briggs wasn't done. He turned toward the remaining HOA members and the construction workers still milling around. "This is private land. Anyone without written permission from the McAllister family has 60 seconds to get back in your trucks and roll out, or you'll be charged with accessory trespass." They scrambled like ants under a magnifying glass. Bulldozers reversed. Flags dropped. Trucks peeled off. I stood beside Briggs as the last one disappeared down the gravel road. Only the wind and the dust remained. That night, I sat on the porch with Sheriff Briggs and Deputy Maria. Travis grilled steaks out back. Bandit, with his leg now bandaged and healing, stood quietly in the stable under the moonlight. "I gotta admit," Briggs said, sipping coffee, "I didn't think Earl would go that far." I leaned back in my chair. "He thought I'd break. But you didn't." I looked out across the pasture. My pasture. The same land my grandfather broke his back to build. The same dirt my father plowed until his final breath. "No," I said softly. "Because some things are worth fighting for." Deputy Maria smiled. "You didn't just win back your land. You made it clear, HOA or not, there are still rules in this county." We clinked mugs. For the first time in weeks I felt peace, but peace didn't last long. Because just as we were about to head inside, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It read, "You got Earl, but we're not all gone. See you soon." The board. I stared at the screen, and the final twist hit me like a hammer. Earl wasn't acting alone. The moment I read that message, "You got Earl, but we're not all gone. See you soon." The board. A cold chill slid down my spine. Not because I was afraid, no. I'd already stared down a crooked HOA president, outrun their fake patrols, and stood my ground while bulldozers roared across my land. But this message wasn't loud or messy. It was quiet. Calculated. That's what made it dangerous. I showed the phone to Sheriff Briggs and Deputy Maria. They read it in silence. Briggs muttered, "I was afraid of this." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean there's more?" He gave a tight nod. "Earl might have been the face, but someone else has been feeding him the real muscle. The HOA board. Those folks are smarter, richer, and 10 times more vindictive. We just flushed out their puppet." Maria chimed in. "We've seen this before. HOA boards using presidents to do their dirty work, while they hide behind committees and legal teams." "So what now?" I asked. Briggs straightened up and stared at the ranch under the moonlight. "Now we wait, and we watch. They'll come again. But next time they won't use bulldozers. They'll use lawsuits." Sure enough, it started within the week. A stack of envelopes landed in my mailbox. 6 thick packets, each with a different law firm's name on the front, each one threatening a different type of legal action, creating an unsafe environment for neighboring families, damaging HOA morale and community image, illegally interfering with residential expansion plans. It was all smoke, no fire, but they weren't trying to win in court. They were trying to drain me, bleed me dry through paperwork, court dates, and legal fees until I gave up the ranch or begged to settle. I didn't. Instead, I leaned on something even stronger than land rights: community. Let me tell you something about small towns. You mess with one rancher, maybe you can scare him. But you mess with the rancher everyone buys their eggs from, the guy who fixed the church roof for free, the man who once saved a kid from a flooding creek. Now that's a mistake. Word spread fast, not just through town but across counties. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years started showing up. One brought hay for Bandit, another helped mend the east fence. Even Marvin from the hardware store dropped off tools and said, "Just a loan, but take your time." I received pies, casseroles, and 3 offers to fund a legal defense from local farmers' unions. And then the biggest help came from someone unexpected. A woman named Lydia James. She walked right up to my gate in heels and a blazer, said she was a real estate developer. "I left that HOA last year," she explained. "I sat on the board when Earl joined. They made a deal with a foreign buyer, planned to develop your land into a luxury golf resort." I blinked. "What?" "They've been plotting this for 2 years," she continued, "buying up land piece by piece. But you're the last property in the center. Without your ranch, the whole development collapses." She handed me a thumb drive. "Here's everything. Emails, minutes, internal documents. They even mapped out fake violations months in advance. Earl was just their distraction." I stared at the tiny piece of plastic in my hand. This wasn't just about a nosy HOA anymore. This was fraud, corporate-level theft, land conspiracy. Briggs took the evidence to the state attorney general. By the end of that week, subpoenas started flying. 4 board members were forced to resign. 2 were arrested for falsifying documents. The foreign developer pulled out after the scandal broke headlines in the local paper. And Cedar Loop Ridge HOA? Stripped of funding, stripped of enforcement power, reduced to a glorified neighborhood newsletter. 1 week later, I stood on the porch again. The breeze was light. Bandit was back to trotting like his old self. And for the first time in months, my hands weren't shaking when I poured my coffee. Sheriff Briggs arrived, wearing his usual dusty boots and calm expression. He handed me a folder. "What's this?" I asked. He smirked. "It's official. The county just approved your historical preservation petition. McAllister Ranch is now protected land. Can't be annexed. Can't be rezoned. Not by the HOA, not by anyone." I stared at the papers in disbelief. Briggs tipped his hat. "No one's touching this dirt but you and the people you choose." I didn't cry, but I came damn close. That night we held a bonfire. The whole town came. We burned the last fake violation letters, ate grilled steak, and let the kids roast marshmallows under a sky full of stars. Maria told stories about the early days of patrol. Lydia gave a speech. Travis played guitar. And as the fire crackled, someone leaned over and asked me, "Jack, why'd you fight so hard?" I looked at the land, then the people. "This ranch," I said softly, "it's more than just acres. It's my father's sweat, my grandfather's dream, my future. And I wasn't about to let some HOA crooks turn it into a swimming pool and parking lot." We laughed. But just before midnight, I stepped away from the fire and walked back to the porch. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I braced myself, but when I opened it, the message made me pause. It read, "You stood tall. Respect. Some of us weren't in on the scam. We're cleaning house. You ever need backup? You've got friends on the inside now." I smiled. Maybe not all HOAs are evil, but mine? Well, they'll think twice before ever crossing my gate again. Where are y'all watching from? If you've ever dealt with a crazy HOA, let me know in the comments. And never forget, When you stand your ground, even the biggest bullies fall flat.